Dr. James Harrison's hands froze mid-suture, surgical thread dangling like a broken promise above the gaping wound. The tumor had split open. Inside the necrotic mass, something gleamed under the harsh operating room lights. Metallic, impossible, wrong. His resident leaned closer, breath fogging her surgical mask. "Is that—" Harrison's forceps trembled as he extracted the object. A dog tag, corroded green, but still legible. SGT. Michael Brennan, 173rd Airborne, MIA, 1971. The heart monitor's rhythm seemed to slow, or perhaps time itself buckled. 53 years. A dead soldier's identification embedded in living tissue, wrapped in bone that shouldn't exist. "How?" Dr. Chen whispered. Harrison looked at the patient's unconscious face. Robert Mitchell, age 72, retired factory worker, father, husband, an ordinary man carrying an impossible secret. The answer lay buried in a jungle hell, a brotherhood forged in fire, and a guilt that had literally become flesh. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The story began 53 years earlier, when Robert "Bobby" Mitchell was 19 years old, with coal dust still under his fingernails and West Virginia mountains in his blood. His father worked the mines until black lung took him at 47. Bobby had been headed the same direction, down into the earth, into darkness, until the draft notice arrived in March 1970. Vietnam changed everything. The jungle heat, the terror, the waiting. But it also gave him Sergeant Michael Brennan. Brennan was 23, Boston Irish through and through, with his grandmother's silver crucifix swinging from his dog tag chain. Career soldier, the kind who should have made Bobby's life hell. Instead, he taught the coal miner's son how to survive, how to move through elephant grass without sound, how to sleep with one eye open, how to remember why they were fighting when everything felt like madness. "You got people back home, Bobby?" Brennan had asked one night, sharing a canteen under mosquito netting. "Girl named Sarah. Gonna marry her when I get back." Brennan smiled, touching his crucifix. "Then you stay alive, kid. You stay alive, and you marry that girl. That's an order." They had a ritual. Every morning before patrol, Brennan would tap Bobby's helmet twice. "Not today, coal miner. Not on my watch." Bobby's only recurring nightmare back then was strange. His jaw locked shut, unable to speak, unable to call for help. He'd wake gasping, and Brennan would be there. "Just dreams, kid. Just dreams." Now, in October 2024, Robert Mitchell was 72. The coal mines and Vietnam were lifetimes ago, but the nightmares had never stopped. They'd only gotten worse. He sat at the kitchen table in their Baltimore row house, morning light cutting through cheap blinds. The tumor hung from his chin like a grotesque second head, 18 months of unchecked growth. It had started as a small lump, barely noticeable. Now it dominated his life, made eating torture, made speaking painful, made mirrors his enemy. Sarah moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, ironing his blue Oxford shirt. The same shirt, or its replacement, she'd ironed every Tuesday for 51 years of marriage. On their wedding day in 1973, he'd worn blue. She'd touched his collar and whispered, "You look like hope." He hadn't felt like hope in a long time. Their daughter, Dr. Emily Mitchell, was 44 now. Oncological surgeon at Johns Hopkins, divorced, brilliant, and estranged. 4 years since she'd been home, 4 years since she'd screamed at him that his silence was killing the family. She wasn't wrong. In the garage, buried under rusty nails in his toolbox, Robert kept his Purple Heart. Next to it, a metal box he hadn't opened in decades. Inside that box lay a journal, dog-eared pages filled with his 19-year-old handwriting. March 1971 entries. The last one dated March 15th. The ink smeared by rain, he'd told himself for 53 years. But it wasn't rain. It had never been rain. The tumor pulsed against his chest, a foreign weight that somehow felt familiar, like something that had always been there, just waiting to grow. September 15th, 2024. The afternoon Dr. Harrison delivered the diagnosis. Sunlight slanted through Venetian blinds and pale stripes across his desk. Robert and Sarah sat with their hands clasped so tightly their knuckles had gone white. 51 years of marriage had taught them to hold on when storms came. This felt like a hurricane. Dr. Harrison's face betrayed him before his words did. He was a consummate professional, had delivered difficult news for 3 decades, but when he looked up from the pathology report, his professional mask slipped just enough for Sarah to see the confusion beneath. "Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Mitchell." He set the papers down carefully, as if they might detonate. "The biopsy results confirm a giant cell tumor. Aggressive, yes, but that's not the unusual part." Robert's jaw, what remained functional beneath the massive growth, tightened. Sarah felt it in the way his hand gripped hers. "Unusual how?" Sarah's voice was steady, the nurse in her rising to the surface. Harrison removed his glasses, cleaned them with methodical precision, buying time. "Tumors don't typically contain foreign biological material, but yours does, Mr. Mitchell. Bone fragments, dental tissue, from someone else, somehow integrated into your mandibular structure over what appears to be decades." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's medical training kicked in immediately. "Foreign? You mean like cancer metastasis from another person? That's impossible unless—" "Not cancer," Harrison interrupted gently. "Something else entirely. The bone structure is old, very old. The integration pattern suggests these foreign cells have been part of your body for, I'd estimate, 40 to 50 years. Robert stopped breathing. Sarah counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds before his chest moved again. "How is that possible?" Sarah demanded, but she was watching her husband's face, watching the color drain from his skin like water from a broken vessel. Harrison leaned forward. "In rare cases, we see something called vanishing twin syndrome. In utero, one twin absorbs cellular material from another. Those cells can remain dormant for life, sometimes developing into teratomas or other growths decades later. I believe this might be." "No." Robert's voice was gravel, barely audible. "That's not what this is." Both Sarah and Harrison looked at him. The tumor moved slightly with his breathing, a grotesque pendulum marking time. "Mr. Mitchell, do you have information about your medical history that might—" "I need to go home." Robert stood abruptly, the chair scraping linoleum. "We need to go home." The drive back was silent except for rain on the windshield. Sarah drove because Robert's hands shook too badly. She watched him from the corner of her eye, watched him grip his thighs like he was holding himself together by force of will alone. "Bobby." She hadn't called him that in years, not since Vietnam. "What aren't you telling me?" His hands, she noticed, were positioned exactly like he was holding a rifle. Left hand forward, right hand back, fingers curved around phantom metal. Muscle memory from 53 years ago, surfacing like bodies from deep water. "Nothing," he whispered. "It's nothing. Don't you dare." Her voice cracked. "Don't you dare lie to me. Not about this. Not after everything. I'm not—" His jaw trembled, the tumor making the movement visible, obscene. "I can't, Sarah. I can't." She pulled into their driveway, killed the engine, and turned to face him fully. "You haven't called yourself Bobby since you came back from that war. 53 years, Robert. 53 years of nightmares, of you waking up clawing at your own jaw, of you staring at nothing like you're seeing ghosts. Please. It was barely a whisper. The foreign bone tissue. It's from Vietnam, isn't it? Something happened to you there. Something you've never told me. Robert opened the car door, stumbled out into the rain. Sarah followed him into the house, watched him go straight to the bathroom and lock the door. She stood outside, pressing her palm against the wood, listening to him sob. Deep, wrenching sounds she'd only heard twice before. Once when his father died. Once the night he came home from war. She went to the kitchen phone, hands shaking as she dialed their daughter's number. 3 rings. 4. "Mom?" Emily's voice, cautious. 4 years of silence between them. "Your father's dying." Sarah's voice broke. "The tumor. They found something. Foreign tissue, bone from someone else. Emily, I need you to look at the biopsy report. I need you to tell me what this means." Silence on the line. Then, "Send it to me." "Right now." "There's something else." Sarah looked toward the bathroom door. "I think it's connected to Vietnam. To something that happened there. Something he's never told anyone." Emily's breath caught. "I'm coming home." "Emily, I said I'd never go back." "I know, but if he's dying and there's something medical I can do." A pause. "Book the surgery." "I'm coming home." Sarah hung up and slid down the wall to sit on the kitchen floor, still holding the phone. Outside, rain hammered the windows. Inside, her husband wept behind a locked door. And somewhere in a hospital lab, a piece of a dead soldier's bone lay on a slide under fluorescent lights, waiting to tell its story. September 20th, 2024. 5 days after the diagnosis, Emily's rental car sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before she could make herself get out. Autumn leaves scattered across the windshield, October coming early this year. She gripped the steering wheel and stared at the house where she'd grown up. The same blue shutters, the same crooked mailbox her father had never fixed, the same porch where he'd taught her to identify bones using chicken carcasses from Sunday dinners. "Every bone tells a story, sweet pea," he'd said when she was 8, holding up a femur to the light. "You just gotta learn to listen." She'd become a surgeon because of those lessons, because her father had shown her that bodies were puzzles, that understanding them meant saving lives. And then he'd stopped talking, stopped explaining, stopped letting her in. The front door opened. Sarah stood there, backlit by the hallway light, looking smaller than Emily remembered. Older. Worn down by years of carrying a husband who wouldn't let himself be carried. Emily got out of the car. They looked at each other across 20 feet of cracked driveway, 4 years of silence, of hurt, of words that couldn't be unsaid. "He's in the living room," Sarah said quietly. "I told him you were coming. He got dressed. Put on the blue shirt." Emily's throat tightened. The blue shirt meant he was trying. Meant some part of him still cared about being seen. She walked into the house. The smell hit her first. Not just home, but something else. The sweet, rot smell of necrotic tissue, barely masked by Sarah's lavender air freshener. Medical training kicked in immediately, cataloging symptoms. Advanced tumor growth, likely infection, probable malnutrition. But then she saw him. Her father sat in his recliner, the tumor dominating the right side of his face like a grotesque fruit growing from his jaw. It had been 4 years since she'd seen him. 4 years since the tumor was just a lump, something dismissible, something he'd refused to have checked. Now it hung nearly to his chest, the skin stretched thin and mottled, veins visible beneath like a road map of suffering. All her medical training evaporated. She wasn't Dr. Emily Mitchell, oncological surgeon. She was just a daughter seeing her father dying. Their eyes met. His were the same, Still that clear blue she remembered, but surrounded by pain, by exhaustion, by something else. Shame, maybe, or fear. You came. His voice was distorted by the tumor's pressure on his jaw, words slurred but meaning clear. Of course I came. She moved closer, sat on the ottoman across from him. I'm still your daughter. She wanted to say, I love you. The words were right there, but the barrier of 4 years stood between them, built from his silence and her anger, and neither could quite reach across it. Sarah brought coffee. None of them would drink, and then retreated to the kitchen, giving them space they didn't know how to use. Emily pulled out her tablet, opened the biopsy files. I need to understand what we're dealing with, Dad. Dr. Harrison's hypothesis about vanishing twin syndrome, it doesn't make sense. The bone structure, the age of the tissue, the integration pattern, none of it fits. Robert's hands gripped the armrests. Those same hands that had taught her to tie surgical knots, to hold a scalpel, to trust her own steadiness. I reviewed your medical history, she continued, pulling up scans on her screen. Nothing unusual until 1973. Then suddenly a small mandibular growth appears, documented as a benign cyst. But it wasn't, was it? It was already just beginning. She looked up at him. 1973, 2 years after you came back from Vietnam. Robert's jaw trembled. The tumor made it visible, made every emotion a physical betrayal. Dad, the foreign bone tissue, the dental fragments, they're not from a twin. The isotope dating, the blast trauma patterns in the bone structure, these came from an explosion, from someone who was in an explosion. She leaned forward. What happened in Vietnam? What happened that you've never told anyone? For a long moment he just stared at her. Then slowly he stood. The tumor swayed with the movement, grotesque and awful. He walked to the window, looked out at nothing. His name was Michael Brennan. The words came out like they'd been locked behind his teeth for 53 years. He was 23, from Boston, Irish Catholic. His grandmother gave him a silver crucifix, wore it on his dog tag chain. Emily held her breath. He was my sergeant, my friend, the closest thing to a brother I ever had. Robert's hand came up, touched the tumor. He died holding on to me. March 14th, 1971. His voice broke. His fingers dug into my jaw. He said, Don't let me die alone, Bobby. Don't you dare let me die alone. Sarah appeared in the doorway, hand over her mouth. I didn't, Robert continued. I held him. I promised him. I promised I wouldn't leave him. Emily's medical mind was racing ahead, connecting pieces. Dad, where is Brennan buried? Robert turned to face them. Tears streamed down his face, around the tumor, dripping onto his blue shirt. They never found him. MIA, listed as unrecovered. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Emily stood slowly, understanding crystallizing like ice in her veins. The foreign bone tissue in your tumor. Dad, is it? I don't know, he whispered. I've never wanted to know, but I've felt him every day for 53 years. I've felt him holding on, still holding on. Sarah moved to him, took his hand. Emily watched her parents, 51 years of marriage, of secrets, of survival, hold each other while the truth they'd been avoiding finally breathed between them. We need to test the DNA, Emily said quietly. The bone fragments from your tumor. We need to know if they're Brennan's. Robert looked at her with hollow eyes. And if they are, what then? Then we know the truth. Then we understand what we're dealing with. Then, her voice caught. Then we bring him home, Dad. We finally bring him home. The DNA test took 3 days. 3 days of waiting that felt like 53 years compressed into hours. Emily spent them at her laptop, cross-referencing military records, pathology reports, and medical journals that might explain the impossible. Sarah spent them cooking: pot roast, cornbread, chicken soup, foods Robert couldn't eat anymore, but that filled the house with the illusion of normalcy. Robert spent them in the garage, staring at the metal box he still couldn't open. On the third night, September 23rd, Emily found what she was looking for, or rather, what she wasn't looking for. She sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, illuminated only by her laptop screen. The military database had finally granted her research access, professional courtesy for a Johns Hopkins surgeon working on a veteran case. Sergeant Michael Brennan's file filled her screen, stamped with red letters: classified, unrecovered, presumed KIA. But it was the newspaper archive that made her hands shake. 173rd Airborne suffers casualties, Hill 473 firefight, 7 dead, 3 MIA. March 15, 1971. She cross-referenced the date with her mother's hidden journal, the one Sarah thought no one knew about, where she'd been documenting Robert's tumor growth for 18 months. The tumor's first appearance, March 14, 1973, exactly 2 years after Hill 473. Emily pulled up the pathology report again, studied the cellular structure. The foreign bone showed blast trauma patterns, shrapnel scarring, fragmentation consistent with explosive force at close range. Medical school had taught her about blast dynamics, about how human tissue becomes projectile in explosions, about how bone fragments can embed in survivors like bullets. Her father's words echoed, his fingers dug into my jaw. She opened a new search: psychological trauma and cellular response. Hours disappeared as she fell down a research rabbit hole. Studies on epigenetics, on how extreme stress alters DNA expression, on cellular memory. One article stopped her cold: somatic responses to psychological trauma, when the body keeps score. What if Robert's body had been holding on to Brennan's bone fragments for 2 years before his immune system, weakened by anniversary trauma, stopped recognizing them as foreign? What if the tumor wasn't malignancy but preservation, his body's desperate attempt to keep a promise his mind couldn't bear? She picked up her phone, called Dr. Harrison. It rang 6 times. "Dr. Mitchell, it's 2:30 in the morning. The tumor growth pattern matches psychological stress markers. I cross-referenced with my mother's journal. She's been documenting everything. The tumor grew during my wedding in 2008, during my divorce in 2018, and every March 14th, like clockwork, there's accelerated growth." Harrison's voice sharpened. "The sleep gone." Anniversary reaction? More than that. What if dormant foreign material, Brennan's bone fragments embedded during the blast, remained inactive for 2 years? Then on the second anniversary, extreme psychological distress triggers an immune response failure. The body stops fighting the foreign tissue, starts incorporating it instead. That's, Harrison paused, that's not scientifically impossible. Unprecedented, but not impossible. Trauma-induced immunosuppression combined with foreign body encapsulation, over decades, with repeated stress triggers. It could grow. The body building around the fragments, trying to preserve them while simultaneously being destroyed by them. "My God," Harrison breathed. "Send me everything. If this is what I think it is, we're not just removing a tumor, we're excavating a grave." Emily hung up and finally opened the file she'd been avoiding: the DNA comparison. The test Sarah had authorized, that Robert had signed off on with shaking hands, that would confirm what they all suspected but no one wanted to face. The results loaded. Match probability, 99.7%. The bone fragments in Robert Mitchell's tumor belonged to Sergeant Michael Brennan. Emily closed her laptop and walked to the garage. The light was on. Her father sat on an overturned bucket, the metal box open at his feet. Journal pages scattered around him like fallen leaves. "I read them," he said without looking up. "First time in 50 years. She sat down on the concrete floor beside him, her back against the tool bench. "What do they say?" Robert picked up a page, hands trembling. "March 10th, 1971. Brennan saved my life today. Pushed me down, took the sniper bullet meant for me, grazed his shoulder. He laughed it off, said, 'Can't let a coal miner's boy die before he's seen the ocean.' Made me promise, if he doesn't make it, I'll visit Boston Harbor for him." He set it down, picked up another. March 14th, 1971. "I can't write what happened. I can't. If I write it, it's real. If I don't, maybe I can pretend." His voice broke. "That's where it ends. Ink smeared. I thought I'd finish it later. I never did." Emily waited. The garage was silent except for the ticking of the water heater, the distant hum of traffic. "March 15th, 1971, Robert continued, holding the next page. 2-year gap between entries then. They're calling me a hero. Sole survivor. I told them Brennan was the hero. They said Brennan's MIA, son. You need to accept that. But I can't. Because I know where he is. I know what I did. And I can never tell anyone. Dad, April 1973. Lump appeared on my jaw. Doctor says it's a cyst, but I know better. I know it's him. He's still holding on. I'm still keeping my promise. Don't let him die alone." Emily's throat tightened. "The DNA test came back. The bone fragments. They're Brennan's." Robert nodded slowly, like he'd always known. "Of course they are. I've been carrying him for 53 years. Why would he leave now?" "What happened, Dad? What happened on Hill 473? He stood abruptly, paced the small space. "We were pinned down. Brennan had taken shrapnel to his leg, to his shoulder. He was bleeding bad, but he kept fighting, kept giving orders. He was holding the line for all of us." Emily stood too, moved closer. "The explosion, artillery strike, ours, called in by our own commander because we were overrun. Brennan knew it was coming. He must have known. And he—" Robert's hand went to the tumor, pressed against it like he could feel Brennan underneath. "He grabbed me, pulled me down, covered me with his own body." The truth crystallized between them. "He saved you," Emily whispered. "He died, saving me. The blast went over us, through him. I felt it, pieces of him. I felt them hit me, go into me. And when it was over, when I could finally move, he was—" Robert's legs gave out. Emily caught him, helped him sit back down. "There wasn't enough left to recover," he said. "They tried, they looked, but the explosion, the fire, there was nothing to bring home, nothing but what was already in me." Sarah stood in the doorway. Neither of them had heard her approach. "Bobby, why didn't you tell me? 51 years. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because how do you tell someone that? How do you say, 'The man I loved like a brother died protecting me, and I'm carrying pieces of him in my body'? How do you live with that?" Sarah crossed to him, knelt down, took his face in her hands, careful of the tumor. Always so careful. By not living alone with it, by letting the people who love you help carry it. Emily pulled out her phone, showed them the pathology report. "Dad, the tumor isn't just growing. It's structured. The way the bone fragments are positioned, the way your tissue has built around them, it's like your body has been trying to reconstruct him, to preserve him." Robert stared at the image. "I promised I wouldn't let him die alone. I promised I'd bring him home." "And you've been trying," Emily said, For 53 years, your body has been trying to keep that promise. But Dad, it's killing you. The infection, the growth. If we don't operate soon, the tumor will occlude your airway. You'll suffocate. Maybe that's what I deserve. No. Sarah's voice was steel. That's not what Brennan died for. He didn't save you so you could spend 50 years dying slowly. He saved you so you could live. Emily sat back down beside them. The surgery is scheduled for October 21st, 3 weeks. We'll remove the tumor, reconstruct your jaw using bone from your fibula. But Dad, she hesitated. The bone fragments, Brennan's remains, they'll be removed too. After 53 years, you'll finally let him go. Robert's tears fell silently. I don't know how. We'll help you, Sarah said. Emily and me, we'll all help each other. They sat together in the garage, father, mother, daughter, surrounded by tools and forgotten projects, and 53 years of silence finally broken. Outside, the first real cold of autumn rattled the windows. Inside, 3 people held on to each other and tried to figure out how to let go. October 1st arrived with the weight of decision. Sarah had invited Emily to dinner, a real dinner, pot roast and vegetables and the cornbread Robert couldn't eat but loved to smell. An attempt at normalcy, at being a family again. They sat around the table, plates full, appetites gone. Emily pushed a carrot across her plate. Sarah cut meat into tiny pieces no one would swallow. Robert just stared at the food, the tumor pressing against his chest like an accusation. We should talk about the surgery, Emily said finally. The approach, the reconstruction, the recovery time. Maybe we don't do the surgery, Robert interrupted. Emily's fork clattered to her plate. What? Maybe this is what's supposed to happen. Maybe I'm not supposed to. Are you serious? Emily stood abruptly, chair scraping. It's malignant. You'll die. Maybe that's what should happen. The words fell like stones into deep water. This is exactly what you always do. Emily's voice rose, 4 years of frustration erupting. Choose silence. Choose death. You did it with me for 4 years. Chose not to talk, not to explain, not to let me in. And now you're doing it literally. Emily, Sarah reached for her. No, Mom. He gets to hear this. She turned back to Robert, tears streaming. I said I'd never forgive you for shutting me out, for making me feel like I wasn't worth explaining things to. And you know what the worst part is? I came back anyway. Because you're my father. Because I love you. And you're still choosing silence. You're still choosing to leave rather than trust us with the truth. Robert stood slowly, the tumor swaying. You don't understand? Then make me understand. For once in your life, tell the whole truth. The silence that followed was broken only by Sarah's quiet crying. Then, Robert's voice, barely a whisper. I killed him. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. We were under fire. Artillery coming. I had to choose. Drag Brennan's body out or save myself. His voice cracked. He was already dead. But I left him. I left him to burn. I ran. I saved myself, and I feel him every day. In here. He touched the tumor. This is what I deserve. Sarah stood, moved to him. Bobby, don't. He stepped back. Don't tell me it's not my fault. Don't tell me I did what I had to do. I left my brother to burn, and I've been burning ever since. Emily stared at her father, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the silent, distant man who'd raised her, but a 19-year-old boy who'd made an impossible choice and spent 53 years being destroyed by it. The surgery, she said quietly. It happens October 21st. Because Brennan didn't die so you could spend the rest of your life dying too. He died so you could live. So live, Dad. Finally, live. Robert looked at his daughter, his wife, the family he'd kept at arm's length for half a century. I don't know how. We'll teach you, Sarah said. Starting now. Starting with the truth. All of it. Everything you've never said. And slowly, painfully, in that kitchen where Sarah had made 51 years of cornbread, Robert Mitchell began to speak. He told them about Hill 473, about the choice, about the guilt, about every nightmare, every March 14th, every moment he'd felt Brennan's ghost holding on to his jaw. He told them everything. And for the first time in 53 years, the silence broke. October 21st, 2024. 5 o'clock a.m. The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around Johns Hopkins Hospital like a shroud. Robert sat in the pre-op room wearing a thin gown that made him feel more exposed than naked. Sarah held his left hand. Emily stood on his right, already in surgical scrubs, her hair tied back, face set in professional focus that couldn't quite hide the daughter underneath. A nurse checked his vitals for the third time. Blood pressure elevated, heart rate fast but steady, temperature normal. All the numbers that said his body was preparing for war. Mr. Mitchell, I need you to count backward from 10, the anesthesiologist said, adjusting the IV line. But Robert wasn't listening. He was looking at Emily, really looking at her. Seeing the 8-year-old who'd held chicken bones up to the light, the 16-year-old who'd announced she wanted to be a surgeon, the 23-year-old who'd walked away from her wedding to scrub in on an emergency surgery because someone's daughter needed saving. His daughter, his brilliant, stubborn, beautiful daughter who'd come home despite everything. Emily. His voice was rough, distorted by the tumor. Boston Harbor, if I don't make it, Dad, don't. Listen to me, please. He gripped her hand. Boston Harbor. Take the ashes there. Scatter them at sunrise. It's what I promised him, what I should have done 53 years ago. Emily's professional mask cracked. You're going to make it. You're going to scatter them yourself. But if I don't, you will. She leaned down, kissed his forehead. Because I'm not losing you. Not now. Not when we just got you back. Sarah began humming, soft, barely audible. You Send Me, their wedding song. Robert's eyes found hers, and for a moment, 51 years collapsed into that first dance, her in white, him in his best suit, both of them so young, so certain that love could survive anything. Maybe it could. Maybe it had. 10, the anesthesiologist prompted. Robert took a breath. 10, 9, 8. The room began to blur. 7, 6. Sarah, I love. The words slurred. 5, 4. Brennan, I'm sorry. 3, 2. The world went dark. Sarah stood frozen as they wheeled him away, watching the doors swing shut behind the gurney. Emily touched her shoulder. Mom, you should go to the waiting room. This is going to take 16 hours. I know. Sarah turned to her daughter. You save him. You hear me? You save your father. Emily nodded, unable to speak, and pushed through the surgical doors. The operating room was cathedral bright, sterile, cold. Dr. Harrison was already there, reviewing scans on the light board. 2 other surgeons, Dr. Patricia Okoye for vascular work, Dr. Raymond Chen for reconstruction, stood ready. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, preparing instruments that gleamed under surgical lights. Robert lay on the table, intubated, unconscious. The tumor dominated his profile, grotesque and swollen. Emily scrubbed in, hands moving through the ritual she'd performed thousands of times. But this time, Her hands shook. This time it was her father's blood she'd be swimming in. "Dr. Mitchell." Harrison's voice was steady, grounding. "I need you here. Present. Can you do this?" She looked at him through the observation window, met his eyes. "Yes." "Then let's bring your father home." 6:43 a.m. First incision. The scalpel pressed against skin, and blood welled up immediately. Too much, too fast. The tumor had burrowed into major vessels, wrapped itself around arteries like a parasitic vine. "Pressure's dropping," the anesthesiologist called out. "Suction," Harrison commanded. "Doctor." "Mitchell, clamp that bleeder." Emily's hands moved automatically, found the vessel, clamped. The bleeding slowed but didn't stop. Somewhere beneath the tumor, something was feeding it, keeping it alive. Hour 3. They'd removed the outer layers of the tumor, but the core remained. It clung to Robert's mandible like it had grown roots. Every cut revealed more integration, tumor tissue fused with bone, impossible to separate without destroying both. "We're going to have to take more jaw than we planned," Harrison said. "At least 60% of the mandible." Emily stared at the exposed bone, at the grotesque marriage of her father's body and the growth that was killing him. "Do it." The bone saw whined to life. Emily had to look away. This was her father. This was his face being dismantled piece by piece. Hour 7. The tumor was out. It sat in a surgical tray like some obscene trophy, 23 pounds of tissue, bone, and suffering. But inside it, Emily could see them. The fragments. Pieces of another man, preserved in her father's flesh for 53 years. "Dr. Mitchell, we need to move to reconstruction," Dr. Chen said. "The fibular graft." But Emily was staring at the tumor, at the bone fragments that gleamed in the surgical light. Dr. Okoye moved beside her, began extracting them carefully. One by one, pieces of Sergeant Michael Brennan emerged. A fragment of jaw, a tooth root, splinters of skull. 27 distinct bone fragments, Dr. Okoye said quietly, all showing blast trauma patterns, all integrated into the tumor structure like... She paused. Like they were being protected. Emily picked up one fragment with forceps, held it to the light. It was a piece of mandible, not Robert's, but shaped so similarly. "His body was trying to rebuild him," she whispered. "All these years, it was trying to bring Brennan back." "Dr. Mitchell," Harrison's voice cut through. "We need you." She set down the fragment, refocused. Her father's leg was being opened now, the fibula being harvested for the jaw reconstruction. But when Dr. Chen tried to position the graft, something was wrong. Order 12. The fibular graft wasn't taking. Every time they tried to secure it, blood flow would collapse. Robert's body was rejecting it. "It's like his system wants to hold on to the tumor," Dr. Okoye said, frustration creeping into her professional calm. Emily stared at the surgical field, at her father's ruined jaw, at the extracted tumor sitting in its tray. An idea formed. Insane, desperate, impossible. "What if we don't use just his bone?" The words came out before she could stop them. Harrison looked at her. "What are you suggesting?" "The fragments. Brennan's bone. Dad's body has accepted them for 53 years. What if that's the only graft material his immune system won't reject?" The operating room went silent except for the ventilator's rhythm and the heart monitor's beeping. "That's completely unprecedented," Dr. Chen said. "Using bone from a deceased donor that's been inside the patient for decades, there's no protocol, no research, no..." "There's also no other option," Emily cut in. "We have 20 minutes before his system completely fails. The fibular graft isn't working. We need something his body recognizes. Harrison studied the scans, the blood work, the failing graft. His jaw tightened. It's not just unprecedented, it's potentially unethical. We'd be using remains without formal consent, without proper... He gave consent. Emily's voice was steel. 53 years of consent. His body has been holding on to Brennan all this time. Let it hold on to him one more time. To live this time. Not to die. Dr. Okoye moved to the tumor tray, examined the bone fragments. The material is viable, calcified but structurally sound. If we combine it with the fibular graft, use Brennan's bone as a scaffold. She looked up. It might work. Harrison's hands were steady, but his voice betrayed him. If this goes wrong, if we don't try, he's dead anyway, Emily said. Brennan saved his life once, let him save it again. 15 seconds of silence. Then Harrison nodded. Do it. The next 4 hours were the most delicate surgery Emily had ever performed. They took the largest fragments of Brennan's bone, pieces that had once been jaw, that had once shaped a smile, that had once spoken words of brotherhood, and carefully integrated them with Robert's fibular graft. Microsurgery, suture by impossible suture, building a new jaw from old friendship. Emily's hands moved with a steadiness she didn't feel. Every placement mattered. Every connection was a prayer. She was rebuilding her father's face with the bones of a man who died saving him, trusting that the body that had held on to guilt for 53 years would recognize love when it was offered again. Hour 16. Final suture. Doctor. Okoye checked blood flow with the Doppler. The sound filled the operating room, steady, strong, perfect. It's taking, she said, voice filled with disbelief. The graft is taking. Blood flow is stable. It's like the tissue recognizes itself. Emily stepped back from the table, pulled off her gloves. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline draining away, leaving only exhaustion and something else, something like grace. She looked at her father's face, bandaged, swollen, but whole, alive, held together by his own bone and the bones of the man who'd loved him enough to die for him. Dr. Harrison moved beside her. What you did today, combining the fibular graft with the existing bone fragments, it's never been done before. We'll have to document this, write it up, submit for... Later, Emily said. First, I need to tell my mother her husband is alive. She walked out of the OR, pulled off her surgical cap, and pushed through the doors to the waiting room. Sarah stood immediately, face pale, hands clasped. He made it, Emily said. He's alive. And Mom, her voice broke. Brennan saved him. One last time. Brennan saved him. Sarah collapsed into a chair, sobs racking her body. Emily sat beside her, put an arm around her shoulders, and together they cried. For the man who'd survived, for the man who'd died, for the 53 years between them. In the recovery room, Robert Mitchell lay unconscious, his jaw rebuilt from friendship and sacrifice, his heart beating steady, his lungs breathing deep, and somewhere in the structure of his new bone, in the calcium and marrow and cellular memory, Sergeant Michael Brennan finally rested, not abandoned, not forgotten, not MIA. Home. October 22, 2024. 3:17 a.m. The ICU was dim, lit only by monitors and the soft glow of hallway lights. Sarah sat beside Robert's bed, holding his hand, humming their song under her breath. She'd been there for 19 hours straight, refusing to leave, refusing to sleep, watching his chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. Emily had tried to convince her to go home, to rest, but Sarah had simply said, I've waited 53 years for him to come back from that war. I can wait a few more hours. The ventilator breathed for him, Monitors beeped steady rhythms. IV lines dripped medications that kept infection at bay, that managed pain he couldn't yet feel. His face was swollen beyond recognition, bandages covering the reconstruction, only his eyes visible in the gap between gauze and medical tape. Sarah studied those eyes, even closed. The same eyes that had looked at her across a dance floor in 1973, that had promised to love her forever, that had held so much pain for so long she'd almost forgotten what joy looked like in them. "Come back to me," she whispered. "Bobby, please come back." His eyelids fluttered. Sarah stood so fast her chair scraped linoleum. "Bobby, can you hear me?" His eyes opened, confused, unfocused, searching. The ventilator tube prevented speech, but his hand tightened around hers. He was trying to communicate something, trying to... Panic flooded his eyes. His free hand came up to his face, fingers touching the bandages, feeling the foreign structure beneath. The new jaw, the wrong jaw. His eyes went wide with horror. "No, Bobby, it's okay." Sarah reached for the call button, but Robert's hand shot out, gripped her wrist, not hard, but desperate. His mouth moved behind the ventilator tube, trying to form words that couldn't come. His whole body tensed, fighting against the breathing machine, against the tubes, against everything keeping him alive. Emily burst through the door, responding to the monitor's alarming, "Dad, don't fight the vent." She moved to his other side, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're okay. You're alive. Just breathe. Let the machine breathe for you." But Robert wasn't listening. His hand pressed against the bandages, feeling the shape of his new face, feeling Brennan's bone beneath his fingertips. His eyes squeezed shut, tears leaking from the corners. A sound came from behind the ventilator tube, broken, anguished, animal. The sound of a man discovering he'd been permanently altered, that the thing he'd tried to escape for 53 years had become part of him forever. "Get me something to write with," Emily commanded a nurse. A moment later she pressed a marker into Robert's hand, held a whiteboard in front of him. His hand shook violently as he wrote, letters barely legible. "What did you do to me?" Emily's throat tightened. "Dad, the fibular graft wasn't taking... Your body was rejecting it. We had to..." He wrote again, harder, the marker squeaking. "You put him in me." "We saved your life," Emily said, voice cracking. "That's what we did. We saved your life." Robert's hand dropped the marker. He turned his face away from both of them, tears streaming into the pillow. Behind the ventilator, his chest heaved with sobs the machine couldn't account for, alarms blaring as his breathing pattern fought against artificial rhythm. Sarah leaned close, pressed her forehead against his temple, careful of the bandages. "I know you're scared. I know this isn't what you wanted. But Bobby, you're alive. You're here. And I need you here. I need you to stay." He didn't respond, didn't look at her. Just stared at the wall like he could see through it to some other place, some other time where he'd made different choices. Emily picked up the whiteboard, the marker. "Dad, Brennan saved you in Vietnam. He saved you again yesterday. His bone was the only thing your body would accept, don't you see? After 53 years, he's still protecting you." Robert's hand moved slowly, took the marker, wrote, "I wanted to let him go." "I know," Emily whispered. "He should be at rest." "He is now," Sarah said. "He's at rest, with you, protecting you, like he always did." Robert's body shook with silent sobs. The monitors screamed their distress. A doctor rushed in, checked readings, adjusted medications. "We need to sedate him. He's going to hurt himself." "No," Sarah said firmly. "No more sedation. Let him feel this." Let him grieve. The doctor hesitated, looked to Emily. "My mother's right," Emily said. "He's been numb for 53 years. Let him feel something." They stood vigil as Robert broke apart. All the grief, all the guilt, all the years of silence pouring out in tears and trembling and that awful sound behind the ventilator tube. Sarah held one hand. Emily held the other. And together they anchored him while he fell apart. October 23rd, 2024. Robert remained unresponsive. He'd been extubated that morning, the ventilator removed, but he wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, wouldn't look at anyone. He lay in the hospital bed staring at nothing, his new jaw foreign beneath healing skin. Physical therapists came. He refused to cooperate. Nutritionists brought soft foods. He turned his head away. Emily tried to engage him with medical explanations, with data, with logic. He closed his eyes. Sarah sat beside him hour after hour and talked about everything and nothing. About the weather, about the garden that needed winterizing, about the neighbor's new dog, about anything except the war, the tumor, the surgery, the bones in his face that weren't his own. On the second day of silence, she brought their wedding album, flipped through pages of young faces, of promises made, of a life they'd built despite everything. "Look," she said, pointing to a photo of them cutting cake. "You got frosting on my nose. You said it was an accident, but I knew better." Robert's eyes remained fixed on the ceiling. "This one," she turned the page. "Our first dance. You were so nervous you stepped on my feet 3 times. I didn't care. I would have danced with broken toes if it meant being close to you." Nothing. Sarah closed the album, set it aside. "Bobby, I know you're angry. I know you feel like we made this choice for you. Like we took away your control. And maybe we did. Maybe we were wrong." Her voice broke. "But I couldn't let you die. I couldn't. 51 years of marriage, of loving you, of watching you suffer. I couldn't let it end like that." Robert's jaw clenched. She could see the movement now, could see the foreign structure working beneath his skin. Emily did what she thought was right, what she thought you'd want if you could see clearly. And maybe that was wrong too. Maybe we should have let you go. Tears streamed down her face. "But we're selfish, Bobby. We're selfish and we love you, and we need you here." She stood, walked to the window. "The doctors say you're healing well, that you can go home in a few days. But I don't think you want to come home. I think you want to stay here in this silence, in this anger. I think you've decided that living with Brennan's bones is worse than dying." She turned back to him. "So, I'm going to say something I should have said 53 years ago. I can't save you. Emily can't save you. Only you can decide if you want to live. Really live. Not just survive. Not just exist with ghosts and guilt. But live." Sarah picked up her purse, her coat. "I'm going home. I'm going to sleep in our bed. I'm going to make coffee in the morning. I'm going to keep living. And when you decide you want to live too, really live, I'll be there." She walked to the door, hand on the handle. Behind her, so quiet she almost missed it, Robert's voice, rough, broken, but there. "Sarah." She froze. "Don't go." She turned. He was looking at her now, really looking at her, tears streaming down his face. "Please don't go. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to live with him inside me." Sarah crossed back to him, took his face in her hands, careful, always so careful. "Then we'll figure it out. Together. Like we've figured out everything else." "I'm scared," he whispered. "I know. So am I. What if I can't? What if this is too much? Then it's too much. And we'll deal with that too." She kissed his forehead. But Bobby, you have to try. You have to want to try. He closed his eyes, leaned into her touch. I don't know if I deserve to. That's not your choice to make anymore. Brennan made it for you 53 years ago. He chose you. He chose your life over his. And yesterday, he chose it again. Her voice strengthened. So you owe him. You owe him a life that's worth what he paid for it. Robert opened his eyes, looked at his wife of 51 years. How do I do that? One day at a time, she said. Starting with today, starting with eating something, starting with physical therapy, starting with coming home. And then? And then we figure out the rest. October 25th, 2024. Evening. Robert had been moved from ICU to a standard recovery room. The swelling in his face had decreased enough that he could see the shape of his new jaw in the mirror, if he'd been willing to look. He wasn't. Emily sat in the corner chair, reviewing post-operative notes on her tablet. Sarah had gone home to shower and change clothes, promising to return with real food, the kind Robert could actually eat now that he was cleared for soft solids. The room was quiet, except for the low murmur of the television and the occasional footsteps in the hallway. A knock on the door broke the silence. "Come in," Emily called, expecting a nurse. Instead, an older man entered, tall, thin, walking with a pronounced limp and a cane. He wore a veteran's cap, VFW insignia visible. His face was weathered, lined with age and something else, something that looked like carried weight. "I'm looking for Robert Mitchell's room," he said, voice rough with decades of cigarettes or regret or both. Emily stood. "This is his room. Can I help you? Are you family?" The man's eyes found Robert in the bed. Robert had been staring at the television without seeing it, but now his head turned. His whole body went rigid. "You," Robert whispered. The man removed his cap, held it against his chest. "Hello, Bobby. Been a long time." Emily looked between them, confusion giving way to alarm at the expression on her father's face. Not quite fear, not quite rage, something darker than both. "Dad? Who is this?" "Lieutenant Thomas Carver," the man said. "I was your father's commanding officer. 173rd Airborne. Hill 473. The room temperature seemed to drop. Emily's mind raced. Carver. That name was in the journal, in the reports. The officer who'd called in the artillery strike. Robert's voice was ice. "Get out." "I heard about your surgery," Carver continued, not moving. "About what they found. About Brennan." He took a step closer. "I need to talk to you. I've needed to talk to you for 53 years. "I said get out." Robert tried to sit up, grimaced with pain. "You have no right to be here. No right to—" "I know what you think happened," Carver interrupted. "I know what you've believed all these years. But Bobby, you're wrong. You've been wrong for 53 years, and I let you be wrong because I was a coward, but I can't let you die believing a lie." Emily moved between them. "Mr. Carver, my father just had major surgery. He's not in any condition to—" "He called in the strike." Robert's voice shook. "He knew we were there. He knew Brennan was wounded, and he called in the artillery anyway." Carver's jaw tightened. "Yes, I did. Then we have nothing to talk about." "We have everything to talk about." Carver pulled a yellowed envelope from his jacket pocket. "This is Brennan's final radio transmission. Classified for 50 years, declassified last month. I got a copy through Veteran Affairs." He held it out. "You need to read this." "I don't need anything from you." "Dad," Emily said quietly, "maybe you should." "No." Robert turned his face away. "Whatever it says, it doesn't matter. Brennan died because of him, because he gave the order. Because he valued some goddamn strategic position over a man's life. Carver's composure cracked. Is that what you think? Is that what you've believed? He moved closer despite Emily's attempt to block him. Bobby, Brennan gave me the order, not the other way around. Silence crashed into the room like artillery. What? Robert's voice was barely audible. Carver's hands shook as he opened the envelope, pulled out a typed transcript. March 14, 1971, 14:37 hours. Radio transmission from Sergeant Michael Brennan to Lieutenant Thomas Carver. He began to read, voice breaking. Lieutenant Carver, this is Brennan. I'm hit bad. 70-degree angle, upper torso and lower mandible. Enemy position 40 meters and closing. Private Mitchell is attempting evacuation, but I'm slowing him down. Sir. Carver paused, swallowed hard. I'm requesting immediate artillery strike on my coordinates. Repeat, my coordinates. Get Mitchell out. That's an order, sir. Tell him it wasn't his fault. Tell him to live. Brennan out. The paper trembled in Carver's hands. There were 8 more seconds of transmission. Heavy breathing. Then your voice, Bobby. You were screaming at him, telling him no, telling him you wouldn't leave. Then the connection cut out. 20 seconds later, I authorized the strike. Robert stared at him, face drained of color. You're lying. I'm not. Carver set the transcript on the bedside table. Brennan ordered his own death, to save you, to save the rest of the unit. He knew the enemy would overrun our position if we didn't act. He knew you'd die trying to drag him out. So he made the choice, and he ordered me to make it happen. No. Robert's voice cracked. No, that's not... He wouldn't... He would. He did. Carver sat heavily in the visitor's chair, suddenly looking every one of his 76 years. And I've lived with it every day since. I followed his order. I called in the strike on a man who was still breathing, still fighting. I told myself it was military necessity, that it was what Brennan wanted. But the truth is, I was relieved. Relieved I didn't have to make that call myself, that Brennan had done it for me. Emily picked up the transcript with shaking hands, scanned it. Official military letterhead. Declassification stamps. Radio frequency logs. It was real. I let you hate me, Carver continued. When you came back, when you testified that I'd made the call, I didn't correct you. I let you think it was my decision because... His voice broke completely. Because you needed someone to blame. Because hating me was easier than accepting what Brennan had done, and I was too much of a coward to take that from you. Robert was shaking his head over and over, like he could deny reality through repetition. But I felt him. I felt pieces of him go into me. I knew... You knew he died protecting you, Carver said gently. That part was true. The blast. He'd pulled you down, covered you with his own body. The explosion went through him into you. You were right about that. But Bobby, he didn't die because I abandoned him. He died because he chose to. He chose you. The words settled over the room like fallout. Emily looked at her father, saw 53 years of false guilt crumbling, saw the foundation he'd built his entire adult life on, revealed as sand. Why? Robert whispered. Why did you wait so long? Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? Carver asked. Would 19-year-old Bobby Mitchell, covered in his best friend's blood, have accepted that it was Brennan's choice? Or would you have thought I was just covering my ass, making excuses? Robert had no answer. I waited because I was a coward. Because I couldn't face you. Couldn't face what I'd done, even following orders. I let you carry guilt that should have been mine. And I'm sorry. God, Bobby, I'm so sorry. Robert's hand moved to his jaw, touched the new structure there. Brennan's bones holding him together. Brennan's choice, still protecting him. He saved me. He did. Twice. Once in 1971, and again last week when they used his bones to reconstruct your jaw. Carver stood, placed a hand on the bed rail. There's something else you should know. Brennan's family, they've been notified about what was found during your surgery, about the bone fragments. They've requested that his remains be interred at Arlington National Cemetery. Robert's eyes widened. But they're in me. They're part of, not all of them. The fragments that weren't used in your reconstruction. There's enough for a burial. For closure. Carver paused. They want to meet you, Bobby. Margaret Brennan, his sister. Patrick, his nephew. They want to thank you. Thank me? Robert's voice rose. Thank me for what? For carrying pieces of their brother inside a tumor for 53 years? For bringing him home, Carver said simply. For keeping your promise. You told him you wouldn't let him die alone. You held him. And then, for 53 years, you kept holding him. Your body wouldn't let him go. And now, finally, he can rest. Because of you. Emily watched her father process this. Saw decades of self-hatred confronting a truth he'd never allowed himself to consider. That maybe, just maybe, he hadn't failed. That maybe his body's response, the tumor, the preservation, the inability to let go, hadn't been punishment but love. The only way his 19-year-old self knew how to keep a promise to a dying friend. I don't know if I can face them, Robert said finally. Brennan's family? I don't know what I'd say. You don't have to say anything, Carver replied. Just be there. Let them see the man their brother loved enough to die for. The man who loved him enough to carry him home. Carver moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. That crucifix Brennan wore, his grandmother's silver cross, it was never recovered from the blast site. I always wondered what happened to it. He looked at Robert. Did you? Robert's hand went to his throat, to the empty space where dog tags had once hung. It was embedded in my shoulder. I didn't realize until the field hospital. They removed it, gave it to me. His voice dropped to a whisper. I buried it in West Virginia, behind my father's house, under an oak tree. I couldn't look at it. Brennan's sister might want to know that. Might want it returned to the family. I'll tell her, Robert said. I'll tell her everything. Carver nodded, replaced his cap, and turned to leave. At the door he paused. For what it's worth, Bobby, Brennan was right. You did live. You married your girl. You built a life. And from what I can see, you raised a hell of a daughter. One who's brave enough to save your life even when it means doing the impossible. He looked at Emily. He'd be proud. Brennan would be so damn proud. Then he was gone, leaving only the transcript on the bedside table and a truth that reframed 53 years of suffering. Emily moved to her father's side. Dad? He chose it, Robert said, staring at his hands. All these years I thought I left him. I thought I ran. But he chose it. He sent me away. He made me live. Yes, Emily said softly. And my body, the tumor, it wasn't guilt. It was love, Emily finished. Your body was trying to hold on to him, to keep him safe. To honor his choice by keeping him with you. Robert looked at his daughter, tears streaming down his face, touching the new jaw that held pieces of the man who'd saved him. What do I do now? How do I live knowing that? Emily took his hand. The same way you've lived for 53 years, one day at a time, but this time you don't carry it alone. This time, you let us help. And this time, her voice strengthened, you let Brennan rest. Really rest. Not forgotten, but at peace. Robert nodded slowly, exhausted by revelation, by the crumbling of decades of false belief, by the weight of a truth that somehow felt heavier than the lie. "I want to go to Arlington," he said finally. "When they bury him, I want to be there." "We'll all be there," Emily promised. "Mom, me, you. We'll bring Brennan home together." November 15th, 2024. 3 weeks after surgery, Robert stood in his own bathroom for the first time, willing himself to look in the mirror. Sarah waited outside the door, close enough to hear, but far enough to give him space. The house smelled like coffee and the cinnamon rolls she'd made that morning, his favorite, soft enough for his healing jaw. His hand trembled as he reached for the light switch. The bathroom flooded with brightness. And there he was, Robert Mitchell, 72 years old, face reconstructed, jaw rebuilt from his own bone and the bones of a man who'd died saving him. The scar ran from his ear to his chin, angry red still, but healing. The shape of his face was different, the angle of his jaw slightly altered. He looked like himself, but not like someone who'd been broken and reassembled, pieces not quite fitting the way they had before. He touched the scar, traced its path. Beneath his fingertips he could feel it, the foreign bone, the structure that wasn't quite his. Brennan's mandible fragment, incorporated into the graft, holding him together. For 53 years he'd felt Brennan as weight, as punishment, as the physical manifestation of guilt. Now, touching this scar, feeling these bones, he felt something else. Something he couldn't quite name, not peace, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of it. "Bobby?" Sarah's voice, soft through the door. "You okay?" He opened the door. She stood there in her robe, coffee cup in hand, silver hair sleep-mussed, beautiful in the morning light. 51 years of waking up beside this woman. 51 years of her choosing him, even when he couldn't choose himself. "I can see him," Robert said. "In my face. I can see where he is." Sarah set down her coffee, moved closer, studied his face with the careful attention of someone who'd been looking at it for half a century. "I see you," she said finally. "I see my husband, the man I married, the man who came home from war, the man who's been fighting ever since." She touched his cheek, gentle. "And I see you finally winning." "I don't feel like I'm winning." "That's because you're still fighting. But Bobby, the war's over. It's been over. You just never let yourself believe it." He looked at her, this woman who'd stood by him through nightmares and silence, through raising a daughter alone while he was present but absent, through 51 years of loving a man who wasn't sure he deserved to be loved. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it, for the years I was here but not here, for making you carry everything, for—" "Stop." She pressed a finger to his lips. "We don't do this anymore. No more apologies for surviving, no more guilt for living. Brennan chose you, he chose your life, and I chose you too. Every day for 51 years, I chose you. So stop apologizing and start living." Robert pulled her close, careful of his healing jaw, and held her the way he should have been holding her for decades. "I don't know how." "Then we'll learn together." The doorbell rang. Sarah pulled back, smiled. "That'll be Emily and the Brennan family. They're early." Robert's stomach clenched. "I'm not ready." "You'll never be ready, but they're here anyway." She took his hand. "Come on. Time to stop running." In the living room, Emily was already letting them in. An elderly woman entered first. Margaret Brennan, 80 years old, moving slowly, but with dignity. Behind her, a middle-aged man who could only be Patrick, Brennan's nephew. He had the same jawline, the same eyes. Seeing him was like seeing a ghost made flesh. Margaret's eyes found Robert immediately. She crossed the room with surprising speed, stopped directly in front of him. For a long moment she just looked at him, studied his face the way someone might study a long-lost photograph. Then she reached up, touched his jaw, right where the scar was, right where Brennan's bone lived beneath skin. "There you are," she whispered. "There's my Michael." Robert's throat closed. He couldn't speak. "Thank you," Margaret said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Thank you for bringing him home. Thank you for holding on to him all these years. Thank you for not letting him disappear. I didn't—" Robert's voice broke. "I didn't do anything. He saved me. He loved you," Margaret said simply. "Michael wrote to me about you, called you his little brother, said you reminded him why we fight, why any of it matters." She smiled through tears. "And you loved him back. Your body proved it. 53 years of proof." Patrick stepped forward, extended a hand. Robert took it, felt the firm grip, the calluses of a working man. "My father, Michael's older brother, he died never knowing what happened to Uncle Mike. Never got closure, but now, because of you, we can finally lay him to rest." His voice thickened. "That's everything. That means everything." Sarah brought coffee, guided everyone to sit. The living room filled with conversation. Margaret sharing stories of Michael as a boy, of his grandmother who'd given him the crucifix, of the family who'd mourned him for 53 years without a body to bury, without confirmation, with nothing but a telegram that said, "Missing in action, presumed killed." "We never gave up hope," Margaret said. "Not really. Somewhere deep down, we always believed we'd find him. Bring him home." She looked at Robert. "We just never imagined it would be like this." "There's something else," Robert said. He stood, went to the mantel, and returned with a small box. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was the silver crucifix. It was embedded in my shoulder. From the blast. The field hospital removed it. I've kept it all these years. I wasn't ready to let it go. But it's yours. It should be with him." Margaret took the crucifix with shaking hands, held it to the light. The silver was tarnished, dented, bearing the marks of explosion and 53 years of hiding, but the cross was still visible, still whole. "His grandmother told him it would protect him," she said softly. "I guess it did. Just not the way we thought." "It protected both of them," Emily said from the doorway. "Brennan protected Dad in Vietnam. The crucifix came home with Dad, and now Brennan's bones are literally protecting him, holding him together." She looked at her father. "That's love that doesn't die. That's brotherhood that transcends everything." Patrick pulled out his phone, showed them a photo. "This is Uncle Michael, age 22. Right before deployment." The young man in the photo smiled at the camera, the silver crucifix visible at his throat, his jaw strong and sure. Robert stared at the image, seeing the man he'd held as he died, the friend who'd saved him, the brother who'd chosen his life over his own. "He looks happy," Sarah observed. "He was," Margaret said, "right up until the end. His last letter home, he wrote about Bobby. Said, 'I've got a coal miner's kid from West Virginia who's going to change the world someday. Just got to keep him alive long enough to do it.'" She looked at Robert. "Did you change the world?" Robert thought about Emily, about the lives she'd saved, the surgeries she'd performed, the daughter who'd grown up watching him piece together chicken bones and became someone who could piece together human beings. "I raised a daughter who changes it," he said finally. "That's close enough." Margaret smiled. "Michael would say that's everything." They talked for hours, about Vietnam, about the years after, about loss and survival, and the strange ways grief manifests. Margaret showed them more photos, told more stories. Patrick shared memories passed down from his father. And slowly, piece by piece, Michael Brennan became real again. Not just a ghost, not just a name, not just bones in a tumor, but a person. Someone's son, someone's brother, someone's uncle, someone who'd lived and laughed and loved and died for what he believed in. As they prepared to leave, Margaret took Robert's hands in hers. The burial is Memorial Day, May 26th, Arlington National Cemetery. Will you speak? Will you tell people who Michael was? Robert's immediate instinct was to refuse, to hide, to let someone else carry that burden. But Sarah's hand found his shoulder. Emily stood beside him, and somewhere in his reconstructed jaw, Brennan's bones held him steady. "Yes," he said. "I'll speak. I'll tell them everything." "Good." Margaret kissed his cheek. "Because, Bobby, you're the only one who really knew him at the end. You're the only one who can tell the truth about what he did, about who he was, about how much he loved." After they left, Robert stood at the window watching their car disappear down the street. Sarah came up behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist. "You did good today." "I'm terrified of Memorial Day," he admitted. "Of standing up there. Of saying the words. I know. But you'll do it anyway, because that's what Brennan would have done for you." Emily joined them at the window. "I'm proud of you, Dad. For today. For all of it." Robert turned, looked at his wife and daughter. The two people who'd refused to give up on him, who'd fought for his life when he couldn't, who'd brought him home from a war he'd been fighting for 53 years. "I want to go to Boston Harbor," he said, "before Arlington. I want to keep the last promise. The one I made to Brennan in 1971. "What promise?" Emily asked. "He said, 'Can't let a coal miner's boy die before he's seen the ocean.' Made me promise if he didn't make it, I'd visit Boston Harbor for him. Go to the water where his grandmother was from." Robert's hand touched his jaw. "I think it's time I finally did." Sarah smiled. "Then we go. All three of us. We'll take Brennan to see the ocean one last time before we lay him to rest." That night, Robert slept without nightmares for the first time in 53 years. And when he woke, he went to the bathroom mirror and looked at his reflection, really looked. He didn't see a monster. He didn't see guilt made flesh. He saw a man who'd been loved enough to be saved twice. A man who'd been forgiven before he ever knew he needed forgiveness. A man who'd been given a second chance at life, built from sacrifice and brotherhood and bones that refused to forget. He saw himself. Finally. After all these years. And he saw Brennan, too, not as a ghost, not as a burden, but as part of him, permanent, protective, present. "Thank you," Robert whispered to the reflection, to the bones beneath, to the friend who'd never left. "Thank you for choosing me. I'll try to make it worth it. I promise. I'll try." The reflection stared back, jaw strong with borrowed bone, face marked by surgery and survival, eyes clear for the first time in decades. He buttoned his blue shirt all the way to the top, for the first time since the tumor began. Walked downstairs, where Sarah had coffee waiting and Emily was already planning their trip to Boston. Sat at the kitchen table where 51 years of breakfast had been eaten, where silence had reigned for so long. "I love you," he said to Sarah, said to Emily, said it out loud, the words he'd held back for years because saying them meant being vulnerable, meant admitting he had something to lose. "We love you too, Dad," Emily said, and it was that simple, that profound. Outside, November sun broke through clouds. Inside, a family began the work of healing, not from wounds but toward wholeness, not away from the past but with it, integrated and acknowledged, and finally understood. The war was over. After 53 years, the war was finally over. And Robert Mitchell, coal miner's son, Vietnam veteran, father, husband, survivor, was ready to live. Some wars don't end when the shooting stops. For Robert Mitchell, the battle lasted 53 years, carried not in memory alone but in his very bones. This is a story about the weight we carry, the silence that destroys families, and the love that literally holds us together. It's about a coal miner's son who went to Vietnam and came home with pieces of his best friend embedded in his jaw, about a marriage that survived half a century of unspoken pain, and about a daughter who saved her father by rebuilding his face with the bones of the brother who died protecting him. Most of all, it's about learning that the scars we bear, visible and invisible, aren't always punishment. Sometimes they're proof we were loved enough to be saved. That guilt can transform into grace, that it's never too late to stop running from the past and finally come home. Because freedom isn't free, but brotherhood is eternal, and the heaviest burdens sometimes become our greatest blessings. Have you or someone you love carried the invisible weight of war or loss? What would you say to them today if you could? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Let's honor those who served by breaking the silence together.